What do you have to say?
Some weird comment.
And today it's about George. My Why Didn't the Algorithm Speak to George Wilkins, aka the No Summer of George theory. Season 2 introduced one of the biggest mysteries of the entire series. Not what is the algorithm, or what is the safeguard, or even who built the silos. These are broad, a more specific mystery. Why did the algorithm speak to Lukas Kyle, but not George Wilkins? Because now we know something extremely important. George did not simply fail to find the door. He found it. The algorithm knew he was there, and it chose silence. When Lukas reaches the hidden chamber, the algorithm tells him, "I did not speak with Wilkins." This one sentence changes the mystery completely. Because before this revelation, there were several possibilities. Maybe George never reached the door. Maybe he found the wrong location. Maybe he died before activating it. Maybe he didn't have the right access. But the algorithm removes those possibilities. George was there. The system knew, and it made a choice. The algorithm continues. Quinn and Meadows were both given the same directive: you will receive. And if you speak to anyone about this conversation or what you have seen down here, we will have no choice but to initiate the safeguard. This reveals a pattern. The algorithm has a process, a protocol, a succession system. It has chosen Salvador Quinn, Judge Meadows, Lukas Kyle, and now Camille Sims, but not George Wilkins. Why? Theory 1. The algorithm rejected George. This is the strongest explanation. The algorithm doesn't say Wilkins failed or Wilkins was unauthorized or arrived too soon. It says, "I did not speak with Wilkins." That wording seems to matter. The algorithm didn't fail to communicate. It refused. Why reject George? Because George represents the one thing the silo fears most: uncontrolled curiosity. Look at the difference between George and the others. Bernard wants order. Quinn wants to protect the silo. Meadow accepts responsibility. Lukas wants answers, but understands the system. And Camille is willing to make the move necessary to take control of the silo. George wants truth, not power, not authority, not control. Truth. And a system built around controlling information may see that as dangerous. George wasn't someone who could maintain the system. He was someone who could expose it. Theory 2. The algorithm only chooses successors. Maybe the algorithm wasn't judging intelligence. Maybe it was judging usefulness. Look at everyone who receives information. Quinn, Meadows, Lukas. They all have connections to the chain of command. They understand IT, records, information control, leadership. George is different. He's mechanical, a relic hunter, an investigator, an outsider. He discovers secrets from the bottom up. The algorithm may not be looking for the person who discovers the truth. It's looking for the person who can carry the burden of the truth without destroying the system. All this creates kind of a interesting contradiction. The silo needs smart people smart enough to find the truth, but it can't allow people too motivated to reveal it. George may have been exactly that person. And finally, George was the catalyst, not the caretaker. Maybe the algorithm understood George completely. Maybe silence was intentional, because George's role wasn't to inherit the system. It was to break it. Think about the chain of events. George finds the relics, investigates the past, discovers forbidden information on the hard drive. George connects with Juliet. George's death motivates Juliet. Juliet exposes the truth. Mechanical rises. The rebellion begins. The irony is, by refusing to speak to George, the algorithm may have created the greatest threat to the silo. And finally, the algorithm was monitoring George. Another possibility is the algorithm knew George was dangerous before anyone else. The vault likely had access to information far beyond Bernard. They may have watched George mapping tunnels, collecting relics, investigating judicial, meeting Juliet, uncovering Quinn's secrets. It wasn't surprised by George, it was evaluating him. The question becomes, was George rejected because he failed the test or because he passed it too well? So this is part of another theory that the algorithm chooses its audience. The algorithm does not simply hide information, it manages information. It decides who knows, when they know, how much they know. Different people receive different truths. Quinn receives knowledge about the danger, leaves behind information for the future. Meadows receives the truth, but appears psychologically damaged by carrying it. Knowledge becomes a burden. Lukas receives a directive, but appears to discover something additional, something important that changes Bernard's behavior. Camille receives operational instructions. She becomes part of maintaining the system. Robert is basically told he's not qualified for the position. The algorithm isn't just protecting secrets, it is distributing them strategically. This connects to another kind of theory of the living relic. So, relics preserve memory, but people can become relics too. George was a living relic. He carried pieces of the forgotten world. The watch, the drawings, the information, the Pez, the questions, the hard drive. The algorithm preserves civilization through control. George preserves civilization through memory. I don't think George was ignored because he wasn't important. I think he was ignored because he was the most dangerous person to give the truth to. The algorithm could control Bernard, Quinn, Meadows, and Lukas to a degree. But George was impossible to categorize. George couldn't be controlled, he didn't want power, he wanted answers. The algorithm likely recognized that giving George the same directive it gave to the others would have accelerated the collapse of the silo. So it stayed silent. And that silence might have been its greatest mistake, because without answers, George kept searching. He inspired Juliet, which inspired Mechanical and the rebellion. The question may no longer be, why didn't the algorithm speak to George? It may be, did the algorithm intentionally create the rebellion by choosing silence? Or was George the first person it fundamentally failed to predict?